The disappearing man, it was a typical Friday night, or so I thought. My parents had gone out for their anniversary dinner, leaving me home alone. The clock struck 9 p.m., and I was settled in on the couch with a bowl of popcorn and my favorite horror movie playing on the TV. The eerie music from the film echoed through the dimly lit living room, sending shivers down my spine. Little did I know, my real-life horror was about to begin. Halfway through the movie, I heard a faint rustling sound coming from the backyard. I paused the movie and strained my ears, listening intently. The sound persisted, and curiosity got the better of me. I tiptoed to the window and peeked through the curtains. There, standing motionless in the moonlit yard, was a man. He was tall and gaunt, his face obscured by shadows. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly pulled the curtains shut, my mind racing. Who was he? Why was he there? I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way, and I felt a small sense of relief. I peeked out the window again, but the man was gone. Vanished without a trace. When the police arrived, they searched the yard and the surrounding area but found nothing. No footprints, no evidence of anyone being there. They assured me it was probably a prank or my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew what I saw. The officers left, and I tried to shake off the feeling of unease. I locked all the doors and windows and double-checked them for good measure. Yet, I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched. The night dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. I decided to head upstairs to my room, hoping to find solace in the familiar surroundings. As I ascended the staircase, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like someone was following me, their presence lingering just out of sight. I reached my room and closed the door, leaning against it as I tried to steady my breathing. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional creak of the old house settling. I turned on my bedside lamp, casting a warm glow across the room, and crawled into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. Sleep was elusive. Every creak and groan of the house sent my heart racing. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard it, a soft tapping on my window. My blood ran cold, and I forced myself to look. There he was, the same man from the yard, standing just outside my window, staring at me with hollow eyes. I froze, my mind screaming at me to move, to do something, but I was paralyzed with fear. Suddenly, the tapping stopped, and the man disappeared once more into the darkness. I scrambled out of bed and ran downstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to call the police again, but as I reached for my phone, the power went out, plunging the house into pitch-black darkness. Panic set in, and I fumbled for the flashlight in the kitchen drawer. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but it did little to calm my nerves. I turned around, and my breath caught in my throat. Written on the wall, in what looked like blood, were the words, "I'm still here." I felt a scream rise in my throat, but before I could utter a sound, a cold hand clamped over my mouth from behind. The world went dark, and the last thing I heard was a whisper in my ear, "You can't escape." I woke up to the sound of my own ragged breathing. My head throbbed, and my vision was blurred. I was lying on the cold, hard floor of the basement. How did I get here? Panic surged through me as I tried to piece together the fragments of my memory. The man, the message on the wall, the whisper in my ear, it all came flooding back, sending a fresh wave of terror through me. The basement was pitch black, save for a sliver of moonlight filtering through a small, high window. I struggled to my feet, my legs shaky and unsteady. The air was damp and heavy, making it hard to breathe. I had to get out of here, had to find help. I felt my way along the rough stone walls, searching for the staircase. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of water echoing in the darkness. Just as my fingers brushed against the wooden railing, I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound. A whisper. "You're not alone." My heart pounded in my chest as I spun around, my flashlight in hand. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing only empty space. But the whisper was real, and it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I forced myself to climb the stairs, one shaky step at a time. Each creak of the wood echoed like a gunshot in the silence. When I reached the top, I found the basement door ajar. I pushed it open and stepped into the hallway, my flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. The house was still and silent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I crept through the rooms, searching for any sign of the intruder. The living room was just as I had left it, the horror movie paused on the TV screen. The popcorn bowl lay overturned on the floor, kernels scattered across the carpet. As I moved into the kitchen, the flashlight beam landed on something that made my blood run cold. Another message, scrawled in what looked like blood, on the refrigerator door. "I'm in the house." I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. My mind raced. He was inside, somewhere, watching me. I had to get out, had to find a way to escape. I grabbed the landline phone, praying it still worked. My hands trembled as I dialed 911, but all I got was static. The power outage must have affected the phone lines too. I was trapped, alone, with a madman. Desperation set in, and I decided to make a run for it. I dashed towards the front door, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly. Just as I reached for the doorknob, something caught my eye, a shadow moving in the corner of the room. I swung the flashlight around, illuminating the figure of the man. He stood there, eerily still, his eyes locked onto mine. Before I could react, he lunged at me, knocking the flashlight from my hand. It clattered to the floor, its light flickering and casting grotesque shadows on the walls. We struggled in the darkness, his grip like iron around my wrists. I kicked and screamed, but he was too strong. Just as he was about to overpower me, I heard a loud crash from upstairs. The noise distracted him for a split second, and I seized the opportunity. I broke free from his grasp and ran for the stairs, my only thought to get away, to find safety. I stumbled into my bedroom and locked the door behind me, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I searched for anything I could use as a weapon, my eyes landing on a heavy lamp on the nightstand. I grabbed it and held it tightly, ready to defend myself. The house was silent again, but I knew he was still out there, somewhere. As I listened intently, I heard footsteps slowly ascending the stairs. My heart pounded in my ears, each step drawing closer and closer. The doorknob rattled, and then there was a deafening silence. I braced myself, every muscle tensed. Suddenly, the door burst open, and there he was, standing in the doorway, a sinister smile spreading across his face. Before I could react, the lights flickered back on, and I caught a glimpse of his face, twisted, malevolent, and all too familiar. And then, just as quickly, the lights went out again, plunging me back into darkness. The darkness was suffocating. My mind raced, replaying the horrifying image of the man's twisted face. I gripped the lamp tighter, my knuckles white with fear. The man had vanished once again, leaving me in a state of heightened paranoia. Minutes felt like hours as I remained locked in my room, waiting for the next move. Suddenly, a piercing scream echoed through the house, shattering the silence. It was a woman's scream, filled with agony and terror. It seemed to come from somewhere deep within the house. My instinct was to stay put, to hide, but something inside me urged me to investigate. I couldn't ignore the possibility that someone else was in danger. Summoning every ounce of courage, I unlocked the door and stepped out into the dark hallway. The house was eerily quiet once more, the air thick with tension. I moved cautiously, the heavy lamp still clutched in my hand. The scream had come from the attic, a place I had always found unsettling even in the best of times. As I approached the attic door, I noticed it was slightly ajar. I took a deep breath and pushed it open, the hinges creaking ominously. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing old, dusty furniture and cobwebs hanging from the rafters. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The attic felt colder, as if the very air had turned against me. In the far corner, I saw a figure huddled on the floor, trembling and whimpering. It was a woman, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear. He's here. He's been keeping me here." Before I could respond, a chilling laugh echoed through the attic. I spun around, my flashlight revealing the man standing behind me, his smile widening into a grotesque grin. He moved closer, his eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. "You can't escape," he whispered, his voice like nails on a chalkboard. I swung the lamp at him with all my might, but he dodged effortlessly, his movements almost inhumanely quick. He grabbed my arm and twisted it, causing me to drop the lamp. Pain shot through me, but I refused to give in to fear. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. His grin faded, replaced by a look of cold fury. "Because you need to understand. You all need to understand." In one swift motion, he dragged me and the woman towards an old, dusty mirror at the back of the attic. "Look," he commanded, forcing us to face our reflections. The mirror's surface shimmered, and suddenly, we were no longer in the attic. We were in a different room entirely, one that looked like it had been abandoned for years. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the floor was littered with broken furniture and debris. I glanced around, my heart racing. "Where are we?" The man released us and stepped back, his eyes never leaving the mirror. "This is where it began," he said softly, almost to himself. Suddenly, the scene in the mirror changed, showing a younger version of the man standing in the same room, arguing with a woman. Their words were inaudible, but their anger was palpable. The argument escalated, and in a fit of rage, the man attacked her, his hands around her throat. She struggled, then went limp. The image faded, and we were back in the attic. The man turned to us, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and madness. "I was cursed," he said. Cursed to relive that moment over and over, never able to move on. The woman beside me sobbed, her fear mingling with pity. "You don't have to do this," she pleaded. "You can break the cycle." The man's face twisted in agony. "I can't. It's too late for me." Before I could react, he lunged at the woman, his hands closing around her throat. I grabbed the fallen lamp and smashed it against his head. He staggered, releasing the woman, and I seized the opportunity to pull her away. We ran down the stairs, the man's enraged screams echoing behind us. The house seemed to come alive with shadows, closing in on us as we fled. We reached the front door and burst outside, the cool night air hitting us like a wave of relief. But as we reached the safety of the street, the woman turned to me, her face twisted in horror. "He's not done," she whispered. "He'll never be done." The streetlights flickered ominously as we stood in the middle of the empty road, catching our breath. The woman's words echoed in my mind, "He'll never be done." The night felt colder, the air heavy with an unspoken dread. We needed to find help, but the nearest neighbor was a mile away, and my phone was still inside the house. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Emily," she replied, her voice trembling. "We need to keep moving. He's not going to stop." We started walking, our pace brisk, glancing over our shoulders every few steps. The house loomed behind us like a dark, malevolent presence, its windows like eyes watching us leave. My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The curse, the mirror, the horrific scene we had witnessed, none of it felt real, yet the terror was all too tangible. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine. I stopped in my tracks, feeling an eerie sensation of being watched. Emily noticed my hesitation and grabbed my arm. "We can't stop. We have to keep going." But it was too late. A shadow moved at the edge of the streetlight's glow, and the man stepped out of the darkness, his face contorted with rage. "You can't escape," he hissed, his voice echoing in the silent night. We turned and ran, our footsteps pounding against the pavement. The man pursued us, his movements unnaturally swift. My heart pounded in my chest, the fear almost paralyzing. As we rounded a corner, Emily stumbled and fell. I reached down to help her, but the man was already upon us. He grabbed Emily, pulling her towards him with a strength that defied his gaunt appearance. I screamed and swung my fists, desperate to free her, but he was too strong. Emily's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of terror and resignation. "Run," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I hesitated, the thought of leaving her unbearable. But she repeated, more urgently this time, "Run." With tears streaming down my face, I turned and fled, my mind screaming in protest. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they would give out. Finally, I reached the house of the nearest neighbor, pounding on the door frantically. An elderly couple answered, their faces etched with concern. I tried to explain what had happened, but my words came out in a jumbled mess. They ushered me inside and called the police. I sat on their couch, shivering and incoherent, as I waited for the authorities to arrive. When the police finally showed up, I led them back to the house, dreading what we might find. The front door was still open, and the house was eerily silent. We searched every room, but there was no sign of Emily or the man. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The police took my statement, but I could tell they were skeptical. The story was too bizarre, too unbelievable. They promised to investigate, but I knew in my heart that they wouldn't find anything. The man, the curse, the horror, it was all beyond their comprehension. Weeks passed, and the nightmares continued to haunt me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still out there, watching, waiting. Emily's disappearance weighed heavily on my conscience, the guilt and fear a constant presence in my life. Then, one night, as I lay in bed, I heard it again, the faint tapping on my window. My blood ran cold, and I forced myself to look. There he was, the man, standing outside with that same twisted grin. My heart pounded, but this time, I didn't feel fear. I felt anger. I grabbed the heavy lamp from my nightstand and approached the window. As I opened it, he reached for me, but I was ready. I swung the lamp with all my might, striking him across the face. He staggered back, and I seized the opportunity to jump out of the window, landing hard on the ground below. I ran towards the old house, the place where it all began. I knew that the only way to end this nightmare was to confront the source of the curse. I burst through the door and made my way to the attic, my heart pounding in my chest. The mirror was still there, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly light. I stood before it, the man's reflection appearing behind me. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. He stepped closer, his eyes filled with a haunting sadness. "Because I can't move on. I'm trapped in this cycle, and so are you." I realized then that the curse wasn't just his, it was mine too. The mirror held our souls captive, binding us to the past. But I wasn't willing to accept that fate. I grabbed a nearby chair and smashed it into the mirror, shards of glass flying everywhere. The man screamed, a sound filled with both rage and relief. As the mirror shattered, the house seemed to tremble, the walls shaking and the floor buckling. I stumbled back, watching in horror as the man began to fade, his body dissolving into the air. The house continued to collapse around me, and I barely made it out before the roof caved in. I stood outside, watching as the structure crumbled into a pile of rubble. The curse was broken, the nightmare finally over. Or so I thought. As I turned to leave, I saw a figure standing in the distance, watching me. It was Emily, her face pale and her eyes empty. She raised a hand, and in it, she held a shard of the mirror. "I told you," she whispered, her voice carried on the wind. "He'll never be done." The realization hit me like a cold wave. The curse wasn't broken. It had simply found a new host. The cycle would continue, and I was now part of it. As Emily disappeared into the darkness, I felt a chill run down my spine. The man was gone, but the terror was far from over. The shadows were closing in, and I knew that no matter how far I ran, I could never truly escape. The nightmare had just begun. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more terrifying tales, and remember, sometimes, the scariest stories are the ones that never end.